Good morning to those of you in the Western, in the Americas, and good afternoon to those connecting in Europe. And we'll get started with our first panel of the ICRRA 2025 conference. So welcome everyone to the conference, Conflicted Culture, Resilience, and Cooperation to Thrive in Changing World Orders. This conference is a pre-event to UNESCO's Mondial Cult World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development. We're delighted to have you with us for this session. The session is called Cross-Border Activism in a Fractured World. It's a panel looking at different case studies, particularly from Medellin, Colombia. This is one of 5 online sessions taking place as a part of the conference. Hopefully, you'll be able to join us for the next sessions and the ones coming up today and tomorrow, which we will have information for here in the chat. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Luisa Mejia, and I'm a member of the ICRRA network. ICRRA stands for the International Cultural Relations Research Alliance. And before I introduce my panelists, I want to say a little bit about the ICRRA and our overall aims for this conference. The ICRRA network brings together global research and insights on the theory and practice of international cultural relations. When we talk about cultural relations, we're talking about ways of working internationally in the areas of art, education, and civil society to build trust and understanding, to promote collaboration, and to enhance and sustain dialogue between people and cultures. However, we're living in an era marked by an increase in violent conflicts, competing narratives, and resurgent nationalism. If we hope to develop more inclusive and representative frameworks for our field, historical reflection and post-colonial approaches are essential, as are practices of relearning. At the heart of these global shifts lies a pressing need to free culture from political instrumentalization and to find new ways to strengthen cultural cooperation, both online and offline, in order to promote trust and mutual understanding and to support post-conflict reconciliation processes. The conference addresses these challenges in bringing together different perspectives and providing a critical conversation on the future of international cooperation and the ability of non-state actors to establish long-lasting international cultural relations. The various panels that we'll be hosting will focus, among other things, on the work of foreign mediation organizations with cultural actors and artists in the WANA region, the cross-border mobilization of artists against the right-wing authoritarianism, and the role of digital sphere in promoting or hindering democracy and intergenerational dialogue. We aim for the conference to be a laboratory, a place for dialogue, and a starting point for various processes and actions. We wish an open and constructive discussion and ask all participants to please be respectful in their interactions. We're glad to have you on board as a part of these discussions. Please post your questions, comments, and reflections in the chat as we go along, and we'll aim to cover as many of these as we can by the end of the session. So now that I've kind of introduced the conference, now I'm going to introduce our speakers. So our 3 speakers are, we have Alejandro Gomez. Alejandro Gomez is the director of the cinema program at the Colombo Americano in Medellin. He's also the editor-in-chief of Kinetoscopio, a magazine that specializes in cinema. He holds a degree in communication from the University of Antioquia, Colombia, with a focus on screenwriting, contemporary narratives, as well as a master's degree in cultural management from the International University of Catalonia in Spain. He was a program director and general coordinator of the Santa Fe Antioquia Film Festival and director of the documentary Neon 90. This is a documentary about the alternative music scene in Medellin, which had its peak during the 90s. Our second panelist is Alejandro Vázquez Salinas. He is the director of the Paul Bardwell Gallery of Contemporary Art. Alejandro Vázquez Salinas is the co-founder also and member of the cultural association called El Puente Lab. This is a laboratory for cultural activation. He holds a Master of Fine Arts from the Utrecht School of the Arts in the Netherlands and a bachelor's degree in visual art from the University of Antioquia. And last but not least, we have Mr. Michael Cooper. He is the director of the Centro Colombo Americano in Medellin. He was also a former high school principal at the Columbus School in Medellin. He holds a master's degree in counseling and guidance and a Bachelor of Science in Education from Ohio State University. I'll also, I think we can start, if it's possible, Mr. Mayor, with a little bit of the presentation, and I'll give a brief introduction about what the Colombo Americano is, the type of organization that it is. And then I've agreed with our panelists, we've kind of rehearsed this before, and we said that the best way to hold this conference or to hold this session is to have a conversation about public diplomacy when it's done by non-state actors, or how do we do cultural relations now that sometimes governments are stepping back. So if we could go to our next slide, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. And so binational centers. Binational centers are near and dear to my heart. I worked at the Binational Center in Medellin, Colombia for several years, and I wrote my dissertation about binational centers. Binational centers are a very unique type of organization. They, most of them in Colombia are grassroots organizations, what means the first binational center in Latin America was established in 1927 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. If I'm not mistaken, if my research is correct, the second binational center in the hemisphere was opened in Bogota, Colombia. And this organization was opened by the US State Department, and it was an institution that was created to share American culture. It was established around or after World War II, and it was meant to increase communication, build trust with Latin America. Currently, there are 105 binational centers in Latin America, and they used to be that the US State Department would fund the director, and they would provide libraries, and they would open up advising centers for people that wanted to study in the United States. So it was very similar to perhaps what maybe the British Council does, or the French Alliance, or the Goethe Institute. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. And it's just basically trying to establish more cultural and educational ties with different countries. The difference is that in 1983, the United States government decided that they were no longer going to fund these institutions, and all of these institutions became independent nonprofits. What is really unique about these institutions, what I found in my research, is that they, because now they're not necessarily tied to a government, it has a very, very strong local participation. And this is really important because it really gives local communities a voice. So it increases mutuality, there's a lot of inclusion, and two-way communication can really take place. In Colombia, binational centers have hosted over 600 international artists in the last 15 years. And that's just looking at some of the binational centers that I had a conversation with. And they currently have over 40,000 students studying English. And I won't go too much into detail so that you don't have to hear me talk anymore, but I'll let perhaps my next slide is about the Colombo Americano in Medellin. So I'll let you guys describe a little bit what the Colombo Americano is. Maybe Michael Cooper can start, and then you guys can chime in as we go.
Thanks, Luisa. As Luisa mentioned, my name is Michael Cooper, and I am the director of the Centro Colombo Americano in Medellin. We were founded, or we started in 1947. We were the second one in Colombia to have the Binational Center open, which Luisa mentioned. The purpose of this center was to teach English as a second language and to exchange cultures between the Colombian culture and the US culture. This started in 47 and went on to 1983, when then the US government decided they were not going to fund this project anymore, and that we all became independent non-profit organizations in Colombia. In Colombia at this time, we are 9 binational centers, all started under the program that was started back in Buenos Aires. So we all had a director at that time when we started, coming from the State Department, that oversaw the activities at each one of our center. And we have like a network. Each one of us are independent. We have our own bylaws, we have our own activities, but we all do the same, pretty much the same thing. We all teach English as a second language. That is our motor to be able to get funding, to be able to come in to do a lot of our cultural programming that we have. And we all have lots of different cultural activities. The Colombo in Medellin, we have 2 movie theaters for independent films, and Alejandro Gomez will explain a little more about that later on. With Alejandro Vasquez, we have the Gallery of Contemporary Art. We have a bilingual library, and really the largest English library in the city of Medellin. And for those of you that are not familiar, Medellin is approximately 3 million people, 2.5 million people. We do a lot of what I want to say, a lot of other activities culturally in the performing arts area. Even though we do not have a performing arts in the center, we do look at bringing in performing arts into the center, into Medellin during the years. The Medellin's main campus is downtown, but we also have 4 other branch campuses throughout Medellin and the outlying areas of Medellin. I guess I'll stop there, Luisa, and let the other 2 kind of introduce themselves, and then we'll go from there.
I had a quick question as we are waiting for them
Okay.
to unmute, because I think that this is something really unique and interesting about it. So these programs started as bilateral cultural cooperation, but would you say that today it extends, right? Because you don't only work with the United States now, like especially, and maybe Alejandro will talk a little bit more about
Right.
this, is now you work with artists from all over the world, and the fact that you're no longer tied to the US government means that you just became a cultural mediator between, the city and the rest of the world.
I always say that we are now, instead of bicultural, we are multicultural, mainly because of the film and the gallery on what they do really brings in other parts of the world and not just the US culture.
I think the film program is pretty unique in the Columbus Americano Colombian model, because many of them has these little cinema clubs. We are really important, but we have 2 cinema theaters. We are an art house cinema. We host through the year many different film festivals, especially what we were talking about, Luisa, the French Film Festival, for example, the European Film Festival, the LGBTQ plus Film Festival. All of this is really important to maintain this multicultural activity for us. And this cinema program is a reference for Medellin, because it started in 1989 and something to connect the audiovisual sector and trying to connect not only filmmakers from Medellin, but also host filmmakers for other countries. During the year, we have this film festival, but we have independent movies, and especially we have a strong support for local cinema and Colombian cinema. So it's an art house cinema reference from Colombia for independent film theaters in Colombia. And also we have, you mentioned earlier, the Kinetoscopio Movie Magazine. And this is right now the oldest cultural publication in Colombia. The Kinetoscopio Magazine was founded in 1990, and we have right now more than 100 issues published in paper, which is really a shift for us. So yeah, this is kind of the main things we do in the film program, the kind of things that made this program pretty unique.
Yes. A part of the cinema program, we also have the art gallery, a contemporary art gallery, and we have been working with so many artists from all over the world. We had artists from Chile, from Argentina, from the Netherlands, from Italy, from I don't know, Burkina Faso, South Africa. So it's like there is this sentence that describes what Colombo Americano is if you want to see the world, you have to enter Colombo Americano. So it's a part of what we do to show and to promote the cultures from all over the world, to allow local people to see what is happening around the world. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Mr. Mayor, if we could go on to the next slide, I have a couple of questions, maybe providing some specific examples of, because I think we talked about this before, is like maybe some projects or programs that show us, that give us examples of how this international cooperation works. So I don't know if you want to talk maybe perhaps about some of the exchanges in performing arts, or I'll let you guys decide.
Yeah, I can begin. I think one of in the performing arts area, which is something that the Colombo has been doing for the last 20 years, we work very closely with the U.S. universities. One of the reasons that I looked at working with universities was that many times they're looking for opportunities for their students to be able to go abroad for a different type of experience. And so one of the first ones that we started was with jazz. Jazz is very much rooted in the US culture. And so that was something that was very important to bring into Colombia, even though jazz has been around for a long time. And we decided to come up with a program of jazz camp, working with US universities and their music departments, a small quartet of jazz. We would usually bring 2 universities down at a time, and they would work and not only in Medellin, but we also had it in the coffee growing region of Colombia with 2 other binational centers there. And they would work 1 week with local musicians, usually high school, early university students, in jazz classes, and then would also perform at the main theater in the city of Medellin. We would have the University Jazz Festival, which we would include 2 local universities. And so we would have 4 different universities. And it was an cultural exchange between the musicians, both from Colombia and the US. And it was also giving upcoming musicians the opportunity to be able to have some classes in jazz from musicians coming from the States. One of the reasons using the universities is that it was low cost for us because universities would help pay for some of those expenses, such as international airline tickets. And then locally, we would look at trying to find funding to be able to cover the other costs, such as hotel, meals, local transportation. That was a very strong program for us. Another program that I think also had an impact in the city was when we brought in the gospel music. Live gospel music was never done in Medellin before. People have heard of gospel; they'd seen it on TV and on shows, but to attend a live gospel gospel concert never existed here. And what we would always do with our performing arts is we would look for that social component where the visiting artist would be able to do some type of workshops with very similar groups here in the city. And in this case, we looked at for gospel, we looked at different vocal groups in the city. And we had several different workshops during the time. And from those workshops, year after year, bringing in different gospel groups from different universities, Medellin organized their own gospel group. And they now have a professional gospel group who do perform. As a matter of fact, several years ago, right after they had been professional, they participated in a gospel competition in Europe somewhere, I don't remember where, and came away with first place. And so I think that shows how what we do can also impact the local community and give them ideas on things that maybe they didn't think about that they might also be able to do to be able to project themselves into the world culture.
Yeah, I've heard that gospel group. They're very good. I think they've done really interesting renditions of Colombian music with gospel and soul. So it's very interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Alejandro. I saw you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, so about the programs, we also had in the gallery educational program. The name of the program is Desearte Paz. I don't know how to translate this, but it's like I wish you peace, something like that. So it is a program of education. We invite some international or local artists to work on very difficult topics. For example, it could be, I don't know, like mining or Afro-cultural, Afro identity or Afro-Colombian identity. We also work on you know, civil rights or the human rights. So all these topics are addressed by international artists with the help of one expert that can give us a brief of the topic. And so we hire some workshop leaders, teachers that are more like artists with the strengths in education. So they design workshops to go to high schools to teach students how to work with these ideas. So the idea is like we work with private schools, public schools all over the city, and we hire like 8 or 7 workshop leaders to go to these high schools, to these institutions, to give several sessions to work on these topics. And you know, this became a very, very important place for those students to develop their own voice, to develop their own they basically their own voice, how their discourse and how they can show with art the problematics or the problems that we are facing and that we are passing through. So in this way, the final session or the final results of these labs are displayed in the gallery, in the art spaces. So somehow this validates their own voice and this amplifies the voice of the students. And it's very interesting when they meet together, when they are in a place. We do these what we call it academic sessions. And in this academic session, we invite more than 200 students in the same place, coming from all over the city. So they meet, and they have to explain to the others what they have done in the process of the labs. And it's very interesting how they adapt the contemporary art language to explain difficult topics as I was mentioned, like Afro identity or mining or violence for childhoods and things like this.
Luisa, I would like to add on to Alejandro's Desarte Paz. Before Alejandro, and Alejandro's been with us for a number of years, but before that, we did have a social project, which I think for me was one of the most impactful ones that we had. And I'd like to explain, because I think explaining what this project was, people can understand a little more of what kind of impact we have in the city. This was the social problem, or the social aspect that we were looking at, was abuse to women. And so we had a Japanese artist come into Medellin. She worked with a local artist, and the population, we always look at working with a certain population. The population we worked with for this project was, we asked the mayor's office to send us 30 females from the mayor's office, secretaries, whatever they wanted to send, but 30 females. The morning of this project, the 30 females came in. The Japanese artist met with them, and she said, many women who have been abused use makeup to hide their abuse. But what we're going to do to you this morning is we are going to make you up to look like you had been abused. We have brought in professional makeup artists, and they're going to work with you for the next hour and a half to give you bruises, black eyes, broken arms. And at the end of that hour and a half, these 30 women were made up to look like they had been abused.
Yes.
We then gave them a calling card. And on this calling card, it had the facts of women's abuse in Medellin. And we said, we want you to go out into the city. You don't have to go back to work. You're going to go ride the metro, ride the buses, go to the grocery store, whatever you want to do. Go into the city. And if someone stops you and asks you what happens, just give them a card, the calling card, that has all the factual information on women's abuse. We also sent out camera people to record what was going on with the people's reaction as these 30 women or these women were going about the city. At 6 o'clock, we had everybody come back to the center, and our opening that evening was the 30 women, along with the videos that we had taped to show the reactions of the people. And then, like Alejandro mentioned, there is the academic component. We work with high school kids. We bring in some case studies. We talk about it so that people are they're more tuned in to what's going on. Many times, a lot of these social aspects that we're working with in our program of Desde Arte Paz are things that are being hidden. And so we're using art. We're using art to pull these things out of society and to be able to talk about them and hopefully educate people as to what's going on and how they can avoid some of these problems.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cooper. Definitely, it's one of remarkable labs that that Colombo American have done in the past. Actually, Livia Posada, who was the local artist, she made some pieces on these this makeup bruises on the faces of the women, and those pieces now they are in the collection of the museum.
Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to also mention was you had also mentioned that at the end of the year we bring the high school students together who have participated in the different labs throughout the year. And I remember this specific lab because they're supposed to choose one of the labs and express it in their own way, whether it be video, whether it be dramatics, whether it be painting, whatever. And I remember that when we brought all these kids together and we had the exhibit for this year, which was the abuse to women, one of the ones that was so impactful was that it was an all-girls school and it was a Catholic school, and they chose women's abuse. And what they did, they had life-size drawings of all the Virgin Marys that you can imagine, but these Virgin Marys were abused. And I remember at that opening, the Mother Superior or the head of the school was there. And I went up to her and I said, how did these girls, how did you allow these girls to use Virgin Mary in this exhibit? And she said, they came to me, they told me what we wanted to do, and all of their arguments were so powerful that there was no way I could say no. And so this was something that, I mean, really drew the attention of the public because Colombia is 90% Catholic. And here you're showing an exhibit of all the Virgin Marys with black eyes or a broken arm, some type of women's abuse.
Yeah.
Wow. I had one quick question for you, Alejandro, and if I'm not mistaken, I understand this right. So a lot of the workshops, you have a local artist working with an international artist and then providing the workshops and everything. Okay, cool. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there you go.
Yeah, from the full program, if we think about cultural programs and international connections, we have to mention Ciclo Rosa. Ciclo Rosa is probably the most beloved film festival we have at the Columbus. Because we are founding members of the Ciclo Rosa. Ciclo Rosa is the LGBTQ plus film festival. We are founding members along with Cinematheca of Bogota and the Goethe Institute. It is really important for not only for the city, but also for the country, because it's the first film festival who talk about sexual diversity through cinema. And the Ciclo Rosa were founded in 2004, and since the early beginning, become a safe space for people who wants to talk about sexual diversity and use cinema as a tool, educational but also cultural tool. And it's really great because in this film festival, we've been allowed to show films for all over the world. German films and French films and Brazilian films, all kind of expressions through cinema from all these different countries can be very powerful. And since the 2004, it's been like a really, really important space, not only for people who love cinema, but also collectives who work from human rights and also from activists from the city, and also just people who wants to be or who wants to be part of this kind of festivals. I feel like they have been shown in the screens. And yeah, it's really important because we in the past we have been support from the embassy of the US, but also from the Spanish embassy, from the mayor's office, and in any in when we have an early version and the last version, we have different people like working together to make possible this, and we have different support from not only the government statements, but also from other social collectives, and also the private sector too. So yeah, this is a really important for, again, not only for the city, but also for the country as a real safe place for the LGBTQ plus community.
Excellent. And I think that when you were talking a little bit about different types of fundings, if Mr. Mayor, if we could go to the next slide, I think that goes into my next question. Oh, sorry. I think you want to say something.
Yeah, no, just to build on with what Alejandro Gomez mentioned with the Ciclo Rosa. And again, this was when I first got there in 2005 as the director. I started on July 1st, and that happens to be right around the time that you have Ciclo Rosa. And I remember walking around the corner to go into the main door of the Colombo, and as I walked around, I saw approximately 25 police motorcycles parked out front of our center. And I was a little nervous. I knew they weren't there to greet me to coming into work. And I went directly to the person who handles security. And I said, Jorge, what's going on? He said, what do you mean? And I said, all those police motorcycles. And he said, no, come, I'll show you. We went into the theater, and as Alejandro mentioned, that not only is it showing the films, but there's also the academic part of Ciclo Rosa. There was approximately 50 Medellin policemen sitting in the theater, because that year what they were focusing on as far as the academic part was hate crimes against sexually different people, and so I was there and I listened a little bit. What we had done was we brought in 3 professionals who worked in that area. For example, one came from Mexico. I remember the one guy from the New York City Police Department who was overseeing hate crimes, and there was one from Europe, but I don't remember what country at this time. But they were having workshops and discussions with the local peace force, police department in Medellin, on how to work with these types of populations to be able to help them not be not be affected by the hate crimes because of who they were. And so that's just a sample of what is done with the academic section during the Ciclo Rosa. But again, everything that we try to do has some type of social component that goes into it.
Yeah, so it's not just like bringing a performance or bringing a show. It's inviting the community and the local people to participate, to also express their ideas, to think about, like, and I think Alejandro Vasquez mentioned this, is like to think about different topics that are really complex, they're really difficult, but doing it through the arts, right? So that it softens and it gets people thinking. So as we were talking about this, because that was one of the things that I find the most interesting about binational centers, and specifically the Colombo Americano, is how flexible you have become in funding projects, right? Because sometimes, and maybe I'll ask this question, like I know from my research and from working with you guys, that sometimes it's the local government, sometimes the city has funding and it provides funding. Sometimes it's the US Embassy, sometimes in film festivals, it might be the Embassy of Spain, or it might be the GOAT, and I always pronounce it right, but other institutes that provide funding, but you are able to, and then you also have the language classes. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, like, either provide an example of a project that was primarily funded by a local or an international government that stopped being funding, and how you adapted those programs to be able to carry them out when there was no longer, because I think we're going to see this as we go into the future. We're going to see less and less government support for culture. But
yeah, well, one of the programs that had been cut in funds, it was precisely Desearte Paz, that we had been working since 2004 until 2015 or 16, more or less. And since then, we had to do it by ourselves. We had to do it with the fundings of Colombo Americano, the money that English lessons and classes gave us to work with. And yeah, those labs from 2016 until 2020, which is the year of the pandemic, so it have to be done with our own money. And what it is, well, what it is tough to say is that since pandemics, we couldn't do any more labs because yeah, things get really difficult to do it. And well, since until 2020, we have done 62 labs, different labs with different artists and different experts from all over the world.
yeah, that's a great example of adaptability. And
Yeah.
I think I can mention also when the Colombo, like Alejandro had mentioned, you know, we do have our money making, our motor for our center is the English classes. And so after we pay all of our bills and our teachers and our employees, we then try to see, okay, what kind of other excess funding do we have that we can help the different areas of the culture, because that is one of our you know, our pillars in the program in our institution is English classes and exchange of cultures. So we do have to look at ways that we can help them function in their different activities. However, we can't do it 100%. Funding is limited as to what we have, and we are nonprofit. And so when all of a sudden you get to zero, you have no more money to be able to put into these programs, you need to look at where we can get other funding. When I first came to the Colombo, I realized that the Medellin is the Colombo in Medellin is really the city's culture center at that time. This was back in 2005, and it really was the city's culture center, and it still is today. It still is today. And so I thought, you know, why does the city help out some of the other institutions in the city with money for different projects, but never really look at us and give any money to help with different projects that we're doing, which we are enforcing culture in the city. And so I decided to go to the Secretary of Culture in the city, out of the mayor's office, and took a group of projects that I had in my hand and looking to see how they would help support the gallery, the cinema, the library, some of the different projects that we did on our own, but how could we get some funding from the city? And I remember meeting with the secretary and him saying to me, Michael, why would we give the Colombo, who receives all those dollars, money to run those programs? So at that point, I knew that there wasn't a clear picture of who the Colombo Americano was. And yes, back in, which we had mentioned before, back in 1947, we were started by the US government, but we were still, you know, we were a nonprofit organization at that time. And so they really weren't pumping a lot of money into programming. And so I had to say that, you know, as of 1983, we became independent organizations. We only run on the money that we make from English classes that we sell. And, you know, and you really do, if you want to say, use us as your culture center, I only think it's important that you also see how you can participate monetarily in helping us to support the different programs that we do for the city. And that was the beginning of being able to get money from the government. Every year I would go, I would meet with Secretary of Education, I would present our projects, and they helped us with Deserte Paz, they helped us with the film festival, like Alejandro Gomez mentioned, they helped us with Ciclo Rosa. Usually they were the ones that came up with the funding for the academic part of the program. We had activities from the library, they would help us there. When we started bringing in the jazz groups, they would help us with costs, having refreshments for the 60 students that were attending. They participated in many different ways. And that went on for many, many years. That started in 2000, probably in 2006 is when I probably met with the secretary. And it went all the way pretty much until the pandemic. In Colombia, every 4 years, you change the local government. Every 4 years, I would need to go and explain again who the Colombo is, what we do, and how I felt that they should be part of this. And then with changes of administration and with the pandemic, all of a sudden, that kind of got wiped out. And so we do not have, at this time, local government assistance in our programming. And so we need to look at other things. And I'm going to stop there because I'll get into more of that later on, but maybe someone else can talk about. So I'm not overseeing the entire conversation. Sorry.
Good.
The word, Cooper. I could mention a very specific project called Colombia Corto. Colombia Corto is a special projection of short films. And we did the first version of Colombia in Corto. We did that with a Minister of Culture scholarship. We have funds from the Minister of Culture. And we did the special program. We invite a lot of filmmakers from Colombia and from Medellin to show their short films to the public. And in this first version was free entrance from everyone, but the next year we didn't have the support from the Ministry of Culture. But the people from the city and the filmmakers from the city, they saw and told us that this programming was so important for them that we need to do that, even if we don't have the support from the government or the Ministry of Culture or the mayor's office. And we began this to present these short films, and we began to price that film, that screenings, and the people wants to pay for show to see or to watch these short films. And this is really important because we have been with this special programming for about 5 years right now, and it's become a really important place for the early filmmakers to show exactly that, the early films and the early shorts. And this is really important because we began with this fund from the Ministry of Culture, but right now we have their own people and the families of the filmmakers and the crews of the production of those short films, and all of them are paying to watch the short films, and that make that this special programming began and continue to today.
Yeah, so it's become a true grassroots film program where people are supporting it because they believe in it.
Luisa, looking at the question here, what happens when governments stop funding cultural exchange? And we also have it with the U.S. government. Since we were originally started by the government or part of the government project, they helped, not a lot, but they also helped with bringing in culture into the city. I remember way back when they first started bringing in jazz. This was before my time as the director, but that was one of the big things that they first started looking at, bringing in jazz groups. One of the things with working with the U.S. government, if you ask them to bring in things, they have to work with professionals who are involved in their network, which becomes expensive because in those cases, you need to pay for everything. You need to pay for the international flights. You need to pay for the for their hotels, their meals, everything, and also a fee to pay them. That was one of the reasons why I went towards working with U.S. universities, because you could get the same quality in many cases as professionals. You get the same quality and sometimes better quality working with some of the universities. I remember the first jazz group we brought down was Juilliard's School of Music. I mean, you can't get any better than that. And they participated in 3 straight years with us. And it was because I had them programmed for 2 years, and the third year they wanted to come down and said that they would help pay for the costs. And so when I saw that I knew that then there was the possibility of getting funding from the universities to help offset the costs of their students to come down, which made it a lot easier for our institution to be able to have different cultural exchanges. The US government did participate in some of those. They didn't bring the groups down, but they would participate, for example, in the jazz camps that we did with universities. They would help with money there. Again, I had money coming from the US government. I had money coming from the city government, and I had the universities paying for their international airfare, and then of course the money that we put in, or what we were able to do to be able to get the rest of the money to pay for the event. That has kind of faded away. The US government over the years, it's been less and less for culture. Right now with the US government, we are mainly with, we have projects with them that is in English language. And so we have different scholarship programs from the US Embassy to help teach English as a second language. But as far as culture programming, it's been very difficult to get them to participate in some of the government, in some of our programs in the culture area. I believe probably the last one that we had, Alejandro Gomez, was with the Ciclo Rosa. And was that after the pandemic, or when was that?
2022.
Okay, 2022, which they brought in the academic component, which was a fantastic program, and they funded the academic program to bring in for the Ciclo Rosa in Medellin. That I believe is probably the last, in 22, is probably the last money that we have gotten from the US government for any type of culture programming. So what does that mean? That means that I have to ask both the Alejandros and the other person who works with performing arts and from the library. They also need to start looking for other partners that can help us with funding some of the projects that we want to do. One of the things, for example, with the performing arts area, which we did jazz this year and we did a gospel symphony, we teamed up with a new theater in town and we did co-production. And so that is a way that we can sell the tickets to a concert and be able to cover our costs, local costs, and still working with universities. They're paying their way into the country and out on airlines. So you have them as helping with the funding for the project. Many times, not only do we do a performance and bring in the money that way, but we also then will sell concerts on the side. If they're going to be here a full week, we have sold concerts. One of the big things that this goes back several years, again, before the pandemic, but a lot of your malls or your shopping centers would buy a concert to have in their shopping center. And so we would sing or we would perform in the shopping centers, in the malls. The State University, University of Antioquia, was very interested in having whatever we brought down to perform, to have a free concerts in their theater on their campuses. And so you try to look to see where you can get little bits of money to put together to be able to fund the project that you're wanting to do.
So I guess the answer to the question is what happens? You get very creative. And I think that's helped build, and I think that goes into my next question, Mr. Mayor, if we could go into the next slide, which is like, how do you build this cultural ecosystem, right? Like these set of organizations, groups that come together fund a lot of these projects. And I think that's very unique about it, but I don't know, I mean, about Medellin, but it's also because one of the things that I tell people is like Medellin, Colombia is in fashion and style now. Everybody, you know, the music is prominent, the cinema is prominent, our culture is really kind of exploding in the Spanish speaking world. And I'm interested in seeing like what impact do you feel that a lot of these, your work and the work of other organizations like you have had in sort of putting Medellin in the center of like the, you know, the global stage, or making it so relevant or important now. I know that from a music perspective, as I look at like my work and stuff, there's a huge interest in urban music like reggaeton, and in the cinema, I think Alejandro was mentioning the other day we met, a lot of projects that are going on and things like that.
That's really interesting, because when we talk about the prominence of the music from Medellin and also the cinema from Medellin, there's a real relationship about the two of them, because many of the filmmakers who did in the past, many of the music videos for this big reggaeton artists, not only reggaeton artists from Medellin, not only Maluma, Karol G, or J Balvin, but also all the reggaeton artists from Puerto Rico and from other countries. All these filmmakers use that money, the money they have from the music videos or from the music industry, to produce their first films. So this is a great relationship, because they use that to create another artistic version of the kind of movies, the kind of short films, the kind of movies they want to do, and they use that money. And you have this really important, cast. They have a lot of money from the music industry, but they use it to create this other kind of things, and that allows that many of the movies from Medellin has been awarded in them many of AAA film festival like Venice, like Berlin, like Cannes. All these movies from Medellin have been awarded in that kind of film festival, and this is really important, because again, they use that prominence from the music industry to create another artistic version of the movies they want to do. And this is really, really important. Like a poet, the movie from Medellin that is really important right now. And that movie was awarded in the Cannes Film Festival, and is right now one of the most important movies. And also we have the casting of that movie in the Colombo Americano. And this is like how important the film program of the Colombo Americano are for the audiovisual and cinematographic industry of Medellin. And yeah, I think this is a great example of how reggaeton music and cinema awarded in the film festival has a strange relation, but a real connection between this artistical and point of views.
Yes, also I would like to mention that the Medellin history is very, very, very important. And for example, when we had very bad times of violence in the 90s and at the beginning of the 2000s, but in 2004, 2005, 2006, Medellin started to create a new strategies from the municipality to rebuild the cultural part of Medellin, but like linking the neighborhoods, you know, the hoods and the very low income neighborhoods with culture. So they build libraries with a very nice and modern architecture, and they build also the escalators that are in one of the hills going up in the Comuna 13, which is now one of the reference of cultural tourism in Medellin. It is outside, and it's very interesting. And those days were very important for culture in Medellin. For example, we had one of the labs on forced displacement. That was the topic in Colombo Americano. So we invite one international artist. That artist came from the United States. His name is Tony Evanco, and he liked it so much, the vibrant culture in Medellin, that he decided to stay, and he founded Casa Tres Patios, which is now one of the most important cultural centers in related to arts and community work and peace and you know, like social justice. program, and he is now also part of the board of Colombo Americano. So it's very interesting how these international exchanges that was promoted by Colombo Americano also promotes and started new projects like Casa Tres Patios, but also those days of healing violence were very important for cultural institutions to become very active in the city.
Alejandro Vasquez.
Yes.
And why don't you explain a little bit how the Colombo, and especially in the art gallery, is kind of a stepping stone many times for artists who come out of the university, and how that has helped them to become who they are today, because there are some very important artists in Colombia, in Medellin today, that have gone through our process.
Yeah, let's say that the gallery of Colombo Americano is a very, very important place for art scene in Medellin. So there is in German this this notion of Kunsthal and Kunsthaus. So Kunsthaus will be the museum, and Kunsthal will be like the, I don't know, like room or exhibitions rooms that have a very interesting program. Let's say Colombo Americano is one of those Kunsthal, those places where students of art or maybe like very early days artists are trying to rehearsals their own experimentation. So what it is interesting about the gallery is like it is a place that is, because it has somehow its own founding, we are able to experiment a lot with the contemporary art. So that's why contemporary artists in their beginnings, they are trying to rehearsal or to try out some of their installations or the artworks they would like to show, and the gallery is like a step, as Mr. Cooper was mentioning, is a step for they to see how the work is being shown in a gallery, and it gives them also a promotion and visibility to enter somehow later on to a collection of the museum or some other big and important exhibitions in the city or maybe in the country. And we also invite, as we invite international or local artists, but also Colombian artists from other cities as well. So it's as a place where you can see actually the development of visual arts in the local context.
Yeah, and I remember from when I was doing my research that talking to people, it was that the library is also like the library that is housed at the center. It's a public library. It's open to the whole city, and for many years, it's been like the place where a lot of really unique books and videos and information is kept. And it was always like a reference point for people that were studying cinema, for people that were studying art, and even for language schools, obviously. But it's been sort of at the center of a lot of the culture that has developed around the city. And I think that going back to one of the things that I think it was Alejandro Vasquez that mentioned is the history of the city, and sort of like, I think it's called social urbanism, like the project that they had to make sure that it was like acupuncture on the city, making sure that there were libraries, that they were cultural centers, that you were putting them in the points that perhaps had like the most pain, and making sure that there were opportunities and available to the people in the city that wanted to experience culture. So I think that all of these projects have now developed into what you see now in music and film. And I'll leave it open if there's anything else you want to add to this, or if we'll go to the next slide about the cultural ecosystem. And I guess if there's nothing else, then we might go to the next slide, which is, I believe, the final slide, and then we'll open up to questions from our audience. So I wanted to say, we've talked a lot about, but I guess this question now, as I rethink about it, is like, how do you feel that a lot of this cultural exchange or people coming into the city, has it reshaped your practice? Or the other question would be, because I think the last time we talked about it, it's been more so too, like, how do you, artists that come in, how do they leave changed after this experience? And maybe, I don't know if there's examples of projects that we could talk about, or just in general, like what changes have had through this cultural exchange over the years.
Yeah, well, they all goes away with a very, like life-changing experience. It's always this, yeah, the sensation of, and we also have another example, which is Damon Wade. Damon, he was an artist, or he was more like a sociologist from Canada, and he also trained, and he also practiced rugby. Rugby as a sport. So we also did a lab on the violence in sports, which is something that we have to discuss mostly in, for example, in the fans in Medellin, the soccer teams, they are very violent. So we have to speak about that in high schools, and Damon helped us to design a lab on that, and to speak about the violence in the stadiums and in the matches and in the sports. But he also organized a big championship of rugby in Medellin. And since then, so there was people joining into the local teams of rugby. So there's people from those high schools that participated in the Arte Paz Labs. They wanted to continue doing their sports, but he also started supporting and helping on a foundation of to start a foundation here in Medellin to help some children to get education, for example. That's one of the examples that we had. Mm-hmm.
I think the most obvious answer is when we have this kind of people coming to Medellin, and when we have this kind of guests in our theaters and in the Colombo Americano, they have an idea of what we do, but we have new ideas of what we can do in the future, and especially in the film program. When I talk with them, I have a lot of ideas of how many movies can I show, what kind of movies can we screen, what kind of countries we can make to the theater, and what kind of film festivals I can imagine. So yeah, it's like having a lot of new ideas of, and thinking day by day how many new things we can do in the future. And I probably is the most obvious answer, but it's that we have a lot of ideas coming on and coming up.
I think Luisa, you have to play it day by day. You have to keep your ears open. I can remember going back again to when I first came in 2005 to the Colombo. I've been in Medellin longer than that, but I came to the Colombo in 2005. And I remember going to a meeting of all the directors of the Colombo Americano in Bogota, sponsored by the US Embassy. And I remember at that time hearing that they were looking at really wanting projects to help with diversified groups. And really they were emphasizing at that time your Afro-Colombian population. And so I went back to the Colombo in Medellin, and I met with my administration staff. And at that time, I met with the academic director, the director of the gallery, again with the cinema programming. And I said, we need to look at how we take the projects that we're doing, but we put in the component of Afro-Colombian, because that is where the money is right now. The money there from the US government is to work with that population. And so we designed our projects, and we got lots of money from the US government for academic programs, for cultural programming, because it had that Afro-Colombian component in it. So I think you need to be aware of what's going on with your local groups, with your international groups, and where you can take what you do and kind of align it so that you are someone that they might consider for funding. So that is something that changes all the time. I mean, of course, if you look at what has happened with the present administration at the US government, Afro-Colombian doesn't exist anymore. Afro doesn't exist anymore. It's all of that diversified population is thrown away. And so that's something that still exists in Colombia. Colombia is still looking at helping those diversified groups to be able to expand their knowledge and advance. And so you can look at maybe coming up with things that will be able to get funding from local government or national government in Colombia, because you're not going to be able to get it from the US side. But you know, I think you need to be open all the time and be listening and to see where you can focus on funding.
And I had a question about specifically that project, because one of the things that I just remember from reading different things is that specifically these projects that were trying to support the Afro-Colombian indigenous community, you had a lot of input from the community in terms of, right, like it was the Secretary of Culture, was it, or Education at the moment, that was really involved in developing this project. So it wasn't just like something coming from the outside and saying this is what we want to do, but it was coming, you were consulting with the community and working with them to make sure that the project represented what they right, what the Afro-Colombian community was needing at the time, and the indigenous community.
And no, it was not really local. It was US
Okay.
government. It was US government. It was them who started the program. The program is called Martin Luther King, MLK, a scholarship program for university students. And what they saw was that the Afro-Colombian and the indigenous population were the ones that really had less opportunities to learn a second language. And if you didn't have a second language, many times you were able to get an undergraduate degree, and that pretty much where it stopped. You weren't able to go on to a master's or a PhD. And so the US government came up with this program where it was that they worked with the Colombo Americanos in Medellin, in Colombia, and gave 2 years of English classes, which gave those students a high level, a level of English that they were competitive to be able to work with in any university outside of Colombia, in an English-speaking university, and have success. And there was also a component on leadership. We did different workshops and conferences on leadership for those kids. The whole idea of this was to create new leaders in the country. And so this program, until this current administration, this program had been around for 19 years. It has over 1,000 alumni, and it has alumni that have really made a difference, not only in their communities, in their cities, but also in the country. As a matter of fact, the Minister of Education in the present administration, at the beginning of the present administration, was a graduate of this program. She learned English through this program. She was able to get a master's and a PhD degree in the United States on scholarships, and then was appointed to be Minister of Education. This is someone who came from a community that really there was no future that they would even be able to think that they'd be able to do something like this, but were given the scholarship to learn English, which opened the doors to other possibilities. We tried many times to touch the local government to participate. And even though they thought it was an excellent, great program, till today, we still have not been able to get any Colombian money to go into that specific program.
Yeah. So I'm just to be mindful of the time. I have one more slide, but I'm going to open the floor up for questions that we might have from our audience. I think, thank you. So I think we were worried that we were not going to be able to cover an hour and a half, and I think we have so much more to talk about if we wanted to. So I'm going to open up the floor for questions. If anybody has any questions, they can put those questions in the chat, and we'll have our panelists, our experts in cultural exchange and cultural relations in Medellin, Colombia, answer your questions, and I'll give it a minute for people to answer questions. This was really great. I think the time flew by. We were, and there's so much more to talk about. So, and while they wait, I'll wait. Here's everyone. Here's a chat. Let me open this up here. Is it here? I don't know. I don't think there's any questions yet from the audience. I did have one. Maybe we can start with a brief one while other people post their questions. It was like, are there any lessons that other cities or in the global South like Medellin might learn from what has worked? What has been perhaps the biggest motivator or the thing that has made the biggest difference? Oh, and there's a question here too. So maybe I'll let that let's see what it says. Thank you for sharing your impressive and impactful cultural practice. It seems you built quite a resilient ecosystem. So based on your experience, what is most important for resilience? Keeping independence of the cultural sector. And then there's a second part of the question. At the same time, where do you encounter current limits and how do you deal with them? So what is the most important for keeping your resilience and for keeping your independence in the cultural sector? Like to make sure you're not becoming perhaps propaganda or mouthpieces to different administrations, and what are some of the limits that you encounter? And I hope I translated that question correctly or read it right.
I think one of the situation for us, first of all, the name Colombo Americano, many people associate us with being part of the US government. And even today, there are different groups of people or people who still think that we are part of the American government, even though we are separate. However, we are a strong support system for the US government. As Luisa, with her dissertation, looked into, we are part of the public diplomacy for the US government. So we kind of are playing two roles here. We are independent and we can do what we want to do. But if we're going to look for funding from different organizations for example, as the US government, and with the change that they had made with the present administration, doing away with all the DEI components, we have to again sit back and look to see, in order to continue offering, again, I will say with the English scholarships, which learning a second language is also cultural programming. And so learning English, which was for the Afro-Colombian and indigenous population, we can't use that anymore. If we want to continue using funding from the US to be able to help students learn a second language. And so, again, like I mentioned before, you need to keep your ears open. You need to be able to see what is being emphasized and redirect your project so that it is part of that. So we took out the words Afro-Colombian and indigenous. We took out the words low income. We are still offering those scholarships for university students. So it's now more inclusive and is for students to learn a second language to be able to go on to higher education after their undergraduate degree. So we still have our independence, but again, if you want to be able to cash in on some of this funding that's available in different areas, then you're going to have to rewrite what you're doing. And maybe we're rewriting it for the US government, but it doesn't mean that we can't still, with a local government, if we can find foundations or the government, local government, to be able to sponsor Afro-Colombian English projects, then we do it from there. So we still have our independence to be able to do what we want, but also to keep, like I said, you need to keep your ears open to be able to look to see how can you use what's out there for funding for your organization.
Yeah, well, and also one thing I want to mention is maybe what keeps us resilient is the people, is the communities. They are eager to learn, eager to to show, to speak, to make art as well, to exhibit. So those communities are the people that is actually our trigger, our motivation to continue and to make it what we do. We are a platform, so we have to keep that platform as free as possible, as experimental as possible, as as I don't know. We have to give the community, we have to give people a great opportunity to exhibit their own voice and to amplify their own voices.
And also, if we think about the Colombo Americanos academic, but also cultural center, is a resistance place. What we've been learned from the people we've been working through this year is exactly that word, resistance. The social collectives, the cultural collectives, the artistic collectives, never been easy in Medellin to do this cultural stuff and this cultural work. So last, like Alejandro says, the people and the reference, which is the Colombo for all those people, make us to keep going on. So probably the independence comes also from them, from their point of views and from their support, the support for the people and the collectives and the artists and the filmmakers and all of the people make us to maintain our independence. And this is really great from when we think as Colombo Americano as a cultural center, from the gallery, cinema program, the library, and all the stuff and all the work we did.
I think that's really very interesting. I don't know if there are any other questions. What I was going to say though too is I guess it's an invitation to artists, cultural relations researchers too, because I know that I did my dissertation on a lot of the projects that are run out of the Colombo Americanos, not just the Medellin one, but in Colombia. And this is a really interesting part of these centers is that there's 105 of them in Latin America. There's 9 of them in Colombia, and they're not all the same because they do different projects, but it's a network, right? So if you want to have contacts, if you want to do cultural programming, educational programming in Latin America, this network is there to support that. If people want to do research, if they want to look at different, I think there's someone else that, if I'm not mistaken, that Michael Cooper connected me with that also wants to do a lot of work on looking at some of these programs. The organizations are available and willing to, and they have all the, I guess, the availability resources to help researchers and artists wanting to do that cultural exchange. And the good thing, as you all mentioned, is that it's not just now about bilateral relations, it's multicultural. So there's a lot of opportunities if artists want to participate. I don't know if the Arte Bus is happening, but maybe you guys can revamp that and have a new session. So thank you. I mean, I'm not sure if there are other questions. If you guys want to add anything about the center, the programs before we close up, let me know. But I wanted to say thank you so much. Oh, and I have a closing remark, but I'll let you guys, if you have questions or things you want to add before I do the final closing remarks.
Just, I believe you're going to give them also, or our emails or somewhere. And so if anybody has any questions that they would like to relate to us independently after the conference, we'd be more than happy to be able to answer those questions that they might have.
Yes. Maybe I'll ask Mr. Meyer if he could put the last slide real quick. I think that has the contact information for you guys. And it says, Santiago Jara from the British Council says, this intervention has been really interesting and to see the institutional changes it has gone through that make the Colombo Americano an independent binational center that is an actor of USA Cultural Diploma. And so he is, Santiago Jara, heads of the Arts British Council in Colombia. So that's very great. So excellent. Thank you so much, Santiago. And I think the very last slide probably has their contact information if anybody wants to. There we go. So that's the website and their contact information. If anybody's interested in film exchanges and information like that. If there, let me see if there are any other questions or comments. And yes, so ICRA, I think there's information about the ICRA, which is the International Cultural Relations Research Alliance, which is a global network of researchers and research-based practitioners. in international cultural relations. Our goal is to transfer research-based knowledge between practitioners, political actors, and society, and the promotion of international knowledge exchange. If anybody's interested in joining the ICRA network, we're looking for experts who work in a nonprofit or politically independent research organization. And there is a link there for anybody who would like to join. And so my last, unless there are any other closing remarks, please stay connected or check out our sessions so that you can connect to the next ones. If there are no other remarks, then I will now close this panel discussion. Thank you very much to all our audience for joining us for this session. It's been great. Thank you for our panelists for a very engaging conversation. The two Alejandros and Michael Cooper. For those of you that will join us for our next panel, please, it's going to start, let me just look at my calendar, and I'm going to have the times wrong because I am in the Western Hemisphere, but I believe the next session is starting in 30 minutes. So I'll just give that information. In the name of the ICRA network, thank you very much. I hope everybody has a great afternoon and a great rest of the days for those of you that are joining us from this side of the world, or a good morning or evening, wherever you are. Thank you all so much. I hope you have an excellent day, and I'll see you all later. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Bye
lot.
now.
Bye. Bye.